course using imagination along the way. So without further ado, I would like to give a warm welcome to the stage for Tunde Leye.
No presentations.
That's not yours?
That's not mine.
Okay. Not yours. No presentation?
No presentation. I'm a storyteller.
Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's always interesting to be the first to go. I always have to break the ice and hope that everybody smiles. So this is your cue to smile. Okay, my name is Tunde Leye, and I'm from Nigeria. I'm an author, but I usually tell the audience that I'm many things, and I decide to introduce myself as what suits the audience. So I'm an author, historical fiction. I have about 6 books published out of Nigeria. My most recent is called Afuja the Fall, and it's about the collapse of an interesting empire called the Oyo Empire. Has anybody heard of the Oyo Empire? It's the empire of Yoruba people. So if you're in Brazil, if you've been to Brazil, you find a lot of Yoruba people there who were taken to Brazil as slaves. If you've been to Cuba, if you've been to anywhere in the Caribbean, you'll have found a lot of black people there who were from that part of, and they're going to that part of the world was as a result of that collapse. So I wrote a book about it. But I also do a couple of other things. I run a research firm called SBN Intelligence, which focuses on geopolitics and understanding Africa from an African perspective. I also run a tech company, but that's not interesting.
Actually, that is.
Okay, I run a so it's one of those things. It's one of the things I do. I like it, but I like the story bits more. But I run a tech company called Credit Equity, and we do digital identity. Digital identity, we support fintechs, banks, the Nigerian government. So if you want to get a passport done in Nigeria, for example, that's our technology. If you are opening a bank account in Nigeria, that's our technology that supports the KYC process and all of that. Very boring stuff. But I do that as well. And I run a YouTube channel called the Africa History Channel, where I talk about African history from the perspective of Africans. So I've done a couple of series on that channel. You can check it out on YouTube. Now, if you look at all the things that I do, the ones I find very interesting, you will see they have something to do with story, with narrative, with shaping how people see Africa. And that's my passion. That's what's very important to me. There's a reason why this is very important to me. If you go back, say, 500 years, there were many business people at those times. You know, very rich people, very powerful people in the times who would kill people, who conquered many, many territories and all of that. But if you ask people who they know from those periods, you will find that it is either the people that told stories or the people that they told stories about. Stories are enduring, stories connect people. I had an interesting conversation this morning, and you know, we were talking about where she met someone in the Caribbean who had been in the Caribbean all their lives, and somebody else came from Ghana who had been in Ghana all their lives as well. And the Caribbean person started a story about Anansi the spider. It's a fairly popular story. If you've seen what is American Gods, you'd have seen a character there called Mr. Nancy. It's based on that. And the Caribbean person told the story up to halfway, and then the Ghanaian person picked it up and completed the story. They had never met each other. They lived on different continents all their lives, but they were connected by the story that they were talking about. So it's really important for a people to have a story. It's very important for people to be empowered to tell their stories. It's very important for the people to be the ones telling their story. What we've had for a long time, especially for Africa, is an Africa, and even for the Middle East, is the people whose stories have been told by others, as if the story is a consequence of the coming of others. So for a lot of African story, you find it told from the perspective of people that have come from outside Africa, who have come to do something in Africa, and without a voice for the African telling anything out of that story. The classical example of this is a story by a gentleman called James Conrad, who wrote a story called The Heart of Darkness, about when he visited the Congo in the 1800s. And he talked about, from the perspective of a white man who visited the Congo and talked about how it looked, how the people looked, noble savages, and all the tropes about how Africans are came from that book. And it has shaped a lot of perception of Africans. Many years later, a gentleman who I respect very much, and who some people in the room will know, called Chinua Achebe, was going through schooling, and he read James Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and he was very angry because it didn't portray the people that had a history of their own, that had any perspectives to share with the world. So his anger drove him to write an interesting book called Things Fall Apart, which told the story of the white man coming into Africa, but from the perspective of the African. And that book has gone on to become a classic today. But you see, there's a problem. And you may ask me, what is the problem? The problem is that for Chinua Achebe's story to be heard, it had to be published in the West, in England. There wasn't any path for Chinua Achebe's voice to be heard and for his story about his people, from the perspective of his people, to be told without going to England to get the story published. The definitive history of Yoruba people, I'm a Yoruba guy from Nigeria, so Oyo is about Yoruba. There's a book called The History of the Yoruba People by a gentleman called Samuel Johnson, Reverend Samuel Johnson. He's a Yoruba man himself. He grew up in Oyo around the collapse of the Oyo Empire. And he was educated and he wrote a story. He couldn't find a publisher in Africa as well. In fact, when the manuscript was sent abroad, it was lost. And the definitive history of Yoruba people written by Samuel Johnson would have been lost if his brother, who had kept copious notes while he was writing, was unable to piece together. So I do not think that the version that we have today, that we all read and find very useful, was even close to the original. It was the one that was pieced together by his younger brother from his notes, because he had to go and find a voice for his story from outside. It's important for us as people, as Africans, as Middle Easterners, to begin to support the African and our own stories from our perspective. I was sharing with many friends on my table there. We're talking about the support that Hollywood and how they're able to push their stories to the rest of the world, and the support that they have and all that. And I was showing a chart to him, which we'll get back to when I get back to my table, about one of the most successful films that have come out of Nigeria recently is a film called Blood Sisters. It's not a film actually, it's a 4-part miniseries. And as at the last time I checked, it had 11 million views for its 4 episodes. One of the most successful that have come out recently from Hollywood, from the Netflix stables in Hollywood, because this is also a Netflix original, is Bridgerton. Bridgerton, everybody knows Bridgerton. It's also historical fiction, it's really nice, and all of that. It had 29 million views, 20-something million views, but for 9 episodes. So if we made it an episode by episode comparison, you will find that Bridgerton had fewer views than that Nigerian story that was told. But in terms of budget, one episode of Bridgerton cost $20 million to make. All 4 episodes of Blood Sisters didn't get a tenth of that budget. Some of our best stories Very soon there will be a story about the Dahomey Amazons. How many of us have heard about them? They're these women warriors in West Africa and all of that. Now, there have been attempts by African storytellers to tell their story, but they didn't get support either from Africa or from outside Africa. But the definitive story about them was told by a Frenchman. And there's a Hollywood film coming up. Thankfully, it's being spearheaded by Lupita, who is African. But Lupita is really just a spearhead. It still has the Hollywood structure behind it. The question we need to ask ourselves is, where is the structure from Africa, from the Middle East, to support storytelling that does not contain Western bias? Where's the funding? How can a network like this begin to support our storytelling so that we can take our stories to the world? So that we can take our stories without bias to the world? So that we can take our stories in a way that portrays us without all of the stereotypes to the world, but in a way that will bring something new to the world, that will have global messages, and that will, we're not begging the world to listen to our stories. Our stories are interesting enough. Our stories are beautiful enough. Our stories are great enough for the world to be interested in them if they are told properly. But we need to support storytelling. Because 400 years from now, when all this is maybe history, many people will not remember the companies. Many people will not remember the great presidents. Many people will not remember the great leaders. What people will remember about the people of this time is the stories. Whose stories do you want them to read? Whose stories do you want them to watch? Whose stories do you want them to remember? Thank you very much.
Thank you.